conversation explores the art of thinking beyond the obvious. And today I have my special guest. He's a fellow podcaster as well as an author and the author of the book I Need to Have Talk to You, none other than Mr. Cameron.
Hello, hi Daniel. It's great to be a guest on your podcast. Thanks for having me.
Welcome, Mr. Ken on Abstract Essay. And can you please introduce more by yourself that I missed?
Oh, I'm happy to do so. I guess I can start by saying that I'm both a playwright and author, and I'm also a businessman. So I kind of have both halves of the brain, both the right brain and the left brain.
Awesome, Mr. Ken. I'm inviting you to be part of my Entrepreneurship 101 and let's talk about entrepreneur mindset. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. Thank you. The book title is something. Beyond just grabbing attention, what is the core truth about workplace leadership that is directness in
Well,
meant to reveal?
yeah, I think like a lot of leaders end up avoiding having those difficult workplace conversations that they need to have. So these might be performance review conversations with an employee, or they might be needing to push back against their superiors, or it might be a conversation with a peer or a client or something. But there's so many different conversations in the workplace that we avoid having. And avoiding them doesn't make anything any better. It just lets the problem fester and get worse until we get to the point where we're ready to explode with a phrase like, I need to effing talk to you. And then all of our frustrations come pouring out. So the point of our book is let's be proactive. Let's have the conversation in the moment when we need to have it so that we don't get to that point of starting a conversation with, I need to effing talk to you, which is kind of really, let's face it, the worst way to start a conversation.
Definitely. You position these talks not as necessary evil, but the core work of a leadership. How does reframing the form confrontation to critical maintenance change leaders' mindset?
Well, first of all, will make your life easier in the long run, even in the medium term. But we don't think of it that way. We often, as humans, we're often so adverse to short term pain that we will procrastinate and procrastinate and procrastinate in the hope that the situation will resolve itself. And in actual fact, that just prolongs the short term pain into midterm and long term pain. You're so much better off addressing the problem when it's this big before it gets to be this big.
Mm, definitely. Yes. A key idea is moving from being a good boss. So, to a great leader, what's the first domino that falls when the leader makes that shift?
Oh, that's such a good question. Because the first domino that falls always feels like a small one. It always feels like, oh, that's kind of insignificant. I can let that slide. Oh, well, then comes the second domino. Well, that's not too much bigger. I can let that slide. And that's when the problems really kind of begin to escalate until they're really kind of too big. So that first domino that falls is usually you as a leader usually know when that domino is about to fall or when it has already fallen. You can feel that in your gut. And so the trick is to listen to that in your gut and to lean into those uncomfortable moments that that every leader doesn't want to have. I think the thing that distinguishes great leaders from, I hesitate to say bad leaders, let's say leaders who are aspiring to be great leaders.
Mhm.
I think the core difference is that willingness to lean into those difficult decisions and those difficult moments.
Willingness. We love that willingness. You talk about the perimeter of acceptable workplace conversation. How does a difficult conversation requires us to step outside it? And what new territory does allow team to explore?
They every every single individual and every single conversation that you have with another individual, you naturally create a perimeter around that conversation of what's expected to take place within that conversation. Now, this can be conscious or this can be unconscious, but we do this all the time in every single conversation. For instance, in this conversation right now, Daniel, we've decided we're going to have a conversation about this book. So
Okay.
that's the perimeter we've decided to put around this conversation. If this was a workplace conversation and we had a workplace relationship, we might again have a certain set of assumptions around what we're going to talk about and what we're not going to talk about. That's the perimeter around a conversation. But as soon as one of us, and let's hope it's the leader, as soon as one of us steps outside of that perimeter of that expected conversation, then that fence has expanded. And then so much more field is available, not just to you as the leader, but also to the person that you're leading. And if you're expected to be a leader, you're expected to show the way, and you're expected to improve your team, then the way to do that is to be the first one to take that step outside of that expected perimeter. And as soon as you do that, then you open up this opportunity for learning for your team members, opportunity for growth for your team members. And that's what your team most often is looking for from you. That sense of being able to grow and mature into the best that they can be.
Mr. Ken, let's talk about the preparation and mindset, the called before. Walk us through the non negotiable mental or logistical preparation of saying, we need to talk. What must a leader be a crystal clear on before they even schedule the meeting?
I think what the leader has to be really crystal clear on is the ability to listen and respond. See, I think your question implies that the leader kind of needs to map out the territory completely before beginning the conversation. And that can so often prevent us from having the conversation. My colleague, my co-author, Russell Stratton and I, we run workshops in conjunction with this book. And every time we run these workshops, we always start them off by asking, what are the things that prevent a leader from having this conversation? And one of the top three things we always hear is that they don't have a map for the conversation. And so many people will be afraid of taking that first step outside of that perimeter or leaning into that difficult conversation because they want to be 100% certain and 100% safe about how that conversation is going to unfold. And let's face it, you can't be. In any kind of conversation with any kind of individual, there's always too many parameters to be able to control at all times. So the key thing for any leader is not control, but surrender of that control. To be able to surrender the controlling the conversation into being in the conversation. And that requires being able to listen, being able to take in the information and to respond to what you've heard. It's that notion of listening to respond rather than listening to say what it is you've already prepared to say.
Mr. Ken, a huge hurdle is the fear of damaging a relationship. How do you coach leader to separate their frustration with a behavior from their judgment of the person's character?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's one of the things we do cover in the book is the notion that you have to separate the if you're having a conversation with, say, an employee or a direct report to you, or it really doesn't matter, whoever you're having the conversation with, you really need to make the effort to separate the behavior from the person. So if the person is exhibiting a behavior that has to change. The behavior is inappropriate to the situation, whether maybe they've missed a report deadline, or maybe they've said something inappropriate to a client, or maybe they've just dropped the ball in some other way. So the behavior is what needs to change. So the behavior is flawed. The person is not flawed. The person is not an evil person. Or another way of thinking of it is the person's not just being a jerk for the sake of being a jerk in order to get your goat. The person is exhibiting a behavior that, for whatever reason, that seems to make sense to them at the time. Either they've got too many things on their plate, or they dropped the ball, or they didn't realize how important something was, or they're overwhelmed themselves, or any number of different reasons. But you have to really separate the behavior that they're exhibiting from the fact that they're some sort of evil or malign person or lazy person or poor worker or stupid or any of the other labels we might put on that person. Because the thing you want to change is not the person, but the behavior that the person shows up with. So that's the first and very most important step that a leader must take in beginning these conversations.
Mr. Khan, let's talk about the execution and delivery, the during time. Let's get the tactical on the opening line. How do you start a conversation about sensitive issues like negative attitude or chronic mediocrity without triggering immediate defensiveness?
That's a really interesting question. You're asking such great questions, Daniel, and I really appreciate that. And
Thank you.
this one's, I think, particularly important because it can lead us down a path that leaders so often do that I don't think is fruitful. So often it leads us into what's called the feedback sandwich. So you
Mhm.
try to start a conversation with something nice and warm and fuzzy about the person. And then you get to kind of the meat of the conversation, which is, you need to change this behavior. And then you close the conversation with something warm and fuzzy. And I often say that as humans, with our short-term memory, we follow the rule of primacy and recency. We remember the
Mhm.
first thing we heard, and we remember the last thing we heard. And we kind of
Mhm.
discount all that mushy stuff in the middle. And if you're following the feedback sandwich, then what's the part that they're hearing? They're hearing how great they are, and then
Hmm.
blah, 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 and they're hearing how great they are, which is not the essence of the conversation. So we propose a very different model. And so your key question was, how do you start the conversation? What ought to be your first sentence? So I'll
True.
address that first, and then we'll talk about that model that we use that follows. The
Okay.
very first thing you need to do in the first sentence that you need to kind of start with is, I need to talk to you about your behavior.
Mm.
That's the very first thing you have to do. You're not doing anybody any favors by postponing that sentence. You're not doing anybody any favors by asking about the weather or asking about their kids or asking about how things were going last week. How did you do in the bowling tournament, at the office bowling tournament? How did you do? These are all lovely conversation starters that you could use, but it's not the way to start a performance conversation, because the person they're having the conversation with, they generally know that you're here to talk to them about their performance. So the longer you postpone that, the more uncomfortable they're feeling. And then you're going to pick up on that. The more uncomfortable you're going to be feeling, and the harder it's going to be to have the conversation. So we really recommend just lean into it from the very beginning. So something along the lines of, thanks for coming in today. I'm really glad you're here because I need to talk to you about this behavior.
Mm.
So that's the very first thing. And that's the very first thing you need to start with. And from there, we have a model that unfolds that's outlined in our book, and that becomes the cornerstone of all of our different workshops that we offer around this part of the book, around the I need to effing talk to you portion. And the model is called the BEEF model, BEEF. And it stands for behavior, which I've just covered, example, effect, and future. We'll walk through each of those pieces for you. The behavior we already did, which is, this is the behavior you have exhibited. And it's important to get really clear on the behavior. It's important to be really clear and specific on that. So it's not like, oh, sometimes you drop the ball. It's you sometimes there are occasions when you do not finish the project completely and properly. And then we move to the E, example. Let me give you an example of this. On Tuesday, when we had the board meeting, you were supposed to have completed the PowerPoint presentation, and you did not. It was an incomplete PowerPoint presentation with a number of placeholder slides. So we went into that meeting with that PowerPoint deck, and there was a level of embarrassment for the rest of the team. And that leads us right into the second D, which is the effect. So the effect that your behavior that I've just given you an example of had on the company. Now, this could be on the company. This could be on you, the individual who exhibited the behavior, or it could be on the whole team. And we like to break this effect down into, there's three different ways of looking at it. There's the I, the effect it had on me. There's you, the effect it had on you. Or there's we, the effect it had on us. And of those three, we generally find that the we, the us, is the most powerful because it's really easy for someone to write off the company. Like, okay, so the company missed this contract and we lost this contract. Well, you know what? There's other contracts. It's a big company. They're not gonna go bankrupt just because of this one meeting that I flubbed. Right? So it's easy to write that off. The effect on you is easy to write off. Oh, you are overreacting. Oh, you have a vested interest in that project. So I understand that you are overreacting. It's easy to write off the impact on me. Okay, so it looks bad on me, but I will recover. I'll do better next time. But it's a lot harder for someone to write off the impact on everybody else on the team. So in the example I just gave, where an individual you might be having the conversation with didn't deliver the PowerPoint presentation on time, and it was a degree of embarrassment for everybody on the team. They were left holding the bag in front of the client or in front of the CEO. So now everybody on the team looks bad. So most people in the workplace want to get along with one another, and they want their colleagues to do well. So that's the biggest point of leverage. And that really is the kind of the magic sauce in our formula. And then the last step is the F, the future. And I'll just kind of touch on that very briefly, just by saying at the end of this conversation, you really need to talk about what's going to happen next. Because so often in these conversations as leaders, we're just so happy that we get through it. We're like, okay, I talked about the behavior, I talked about the example, I talked about the effect. Okay, good, now we're done. But what we forget is here's what's going to happen next. I'm going to be asking you to work a little more attentively, and I'm going to check in with you next week at this time. And then we're going to reevaluate together. So you really need to think about where we're going to be going next.
Truly, truly empowering, Mr. Ken, and thank you for sharing to the world. So, as an author, a podcast host, what are your short-term and long-term goals?
As a podcast host, our long-term
Yes,
goals. Well,
absolutely.
we love doing our podcast. We've been doing our podcast, which is called the I Need to Effing Talk to You podcast, for about 6 years now, 5 or 6 years now. We hit over 100 episodes now. We had our 100th episode anniversary last year, and somewhere around about episode 45, we pivoted our formula. We had a great interview with an individual. And ever since, what we do in our podcast is in the first half, we do a little get to know you, ask a series of questions of the individual. But in the second half of the podcast, we ask our guests to tell us about the most difficult workplace conversation they've ever had, how it went, whether it went well or poorly, what they did in the conversation, how they felt during the conversation, because as we've talked about, often these conversations can be emotionally fraught. And then we talk about what happened after that conversation. And what's really encouraging in our podcast is that I'd say more than half of our guests, probably closer to 3/4 of our guests, talk about a conversation that did not go well. And they're getting really vulnerable about, well, I had this conversation, it blew up in my face, I approached it all wrong, it was just a disaster, but I learned this. And it's so empowering. We hear from our viewers. It's so empowering for them to hear from other leaders who also have similar struggles, rather than hearing from people who are like the sage on the stage and I do everything perfectly and you're going to learn from my great wisdom. It's so much more valuable for our listeners when our guests are vulnerable about their own struggles. And so that's what we really like about our podcast. And so when you ask about what the future of the podcast is, I want to continue having these engaging and vulnerable conversations with people who are willing to be vulnerable.
Definitely. Good luck to your goals and looking forward for more success. How about being an author? What are your short-term and long-term goals?
Well, I confess I have just finished the manuscript for my first novel. I mentioned to the earlier that my first career was in the world of theater. So I was a playwright. I've written over 25 or 30 plays. Some of them have been huge hits in Canada. There's one play that has been done for every year for 25 years in a row, which in the world of theater, let alone in the world of Canadian theater, is exceptional. There's always somebody somewhere doing this play. And I've had 2 of those hits, which are really, really wonderful. I've also written 2 business books. We've talked about I Need to Effing Talk to You, and I'm a co-author of another book called Culture Revolution. But I've just finished my first fiction novel, which I'm really excited about. And my agent has just started sending it out to publishers, and I'm very excited about that.
Well, good luck for that novel, Mr. Ken, and I'm inviting you to please do come over and let's talk about it. So, what will be your piece of advice for those people out there who want to be like you?
I would say that they should have a better plan than I did. What I at the same time, I can't really complain. I have had the most wonderful and varied and interesting careers precisely because I have been intellectually restless. And I've
Hmm.
never stayed in one place for very long. So I've been an author, playwright, rather. I've been a theater director. I've been a designer. I've also then moved into production. I ran Canada's National Theatre Festival for many years. And then I moved into being an arts consultant and advising other people on how to run festivals and how to run their arts organizations. And in between there, somewhere, I became a visual artist, and I did about three different art installations, and then I pivoted again and moved into this business world, working in the world of leadership development, along with my co-author Russell Stratton. And now I'm returning to the world of the arts by being an author, writing my first novel. And so after like 35 years of being an artist of some sort. So I would say that, there are many other paths to success that involve picking a path and sticking to it. But my path has been the exact opposite. Mine has been to explore multiple paths simultaneously. So I may not have gone as far down any one of those paths as so many of my peers and colleagues whom I respect, but boy, have I explored the forest.
Yes, you did, Mr. Ken, and thank you so much for that advice. And before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in sixth season, abstract poetry in third season, and of course, my book 101 review in sixth season as well, comedy 101 in a third season, and my food 101 in sixth season too, geography 101, love letters, movie 101, review music 101, our fifth season, science 101, sex 101, fourth season, trivia 101, law 101, and mental health 101, motivation 101, entrepreneurship 101, and of course, my Bible verses 101. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Mr. Ken, tell us, after all years of, well, coaching or writing, what remains a single most common blind spot? The thing even seasoned, well intentioned leaders consistently miss in these crucial talks.
I believe it's listening to their instincts and second guessing ourselves. So often we hold ourselves back from what we know to be the right thing, the important thing, or the first step. You instinctually know what that is. And when you
Mm.
can shut out the noise and listen to your gut, then the first step becomes clear.
Mr. Ken Cameron, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So can you please invite our listeners to support your podcast, your book, or whatever projects that you're doing right now?
Yes, we would love to hear from you. You can find us at I need to effing talk to you.com. That's effing as in F-ing. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Ken Cameron, because if you support him for sure, more and more empowering books like this will rise. More and more empowering episodes of the podcast itself will build and empower people all over the world. I have one more question, Mr. Ken. The phrase "I understand," but often shuts people down. What is a more effective linguistic bridge to acknowledge the perspective while holding the line of accountability?
I understand, and it's that
Mm.
one simple word, the difference between and but. And importantly, we talk about that in our book. I need to effing talk to you. So you can find out all about that in the middle part of the book.
Yes! Once again, thank you so much for your time. Welcome, people. See you soon.
See you
Looking,
soon.
looking forward for Book 101 review.